Caution. The AJ and Quill show contains D&D content and is intended for a D&D audience. And, besides that, they're really weird. Hi everyone, welcome to Meta Adjacent, Player University for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. I'm your friendly neighborhood tiefling professor, AJ, and as always, here's my fearless lab assistant, Quill the Dragon. Say hi, Quill.
Greetings, everyone. Prepare for knowledge!
That bell means it's time for class. Pull out your notebooks and let's get started.
So what are we covering today?
Today's lesson is Barbarians 101, Spirit Totem Warriors.
For some, their rage springs from the communion with fierce animal spirits. Others, from a rolling reservoir of anger in a world full of pain. For every barbarian, rage is a power that fuels not just their battle frenzy, but their uncanny reflexes, resilience, and feats of strength. Barbarians come alive in the chaos of combat. They can enter a berserker state where their rage takes over, giving them superhuman strength and resilience. Now a barbarian can only draw on this reservoir a few times per day. Right, but those few rages are usually more than enough to take care of any enemies. As we said, today's lesson is about barbarians, specifically the Spirit Totem Warrior Barbarian. Barbarians are a fantasy staple and a very fun class to play in D&D 5th edition. Now, barbarians tend to saturate our history and our pop culture. You don't have to look very far to find a barbarian inside of some kind of movie or cinema or book. But let's start with this guy, Conan the Barbarian, created in December of 1932 by Robert E. Howard. But honestly, you can find barbarians everywhere. From Conan to Drax, the Incredible Hulk, Conan, Red Sonja, the Mountain from Game of Thrones, Conan, Wolverine, Blackstar, He-Man, Maui, Minsk, the Scorpion King, Wolfgar, Conan, Hercules, Thor, Samson, Grog Strongjaw, and Conan. The list goes on and on. And yes, I know we mentioned Minsk from Baldur's Gate in that list, and he's always been presented as a ranger, but if you look at Minsk and how he's portrayed, he's actually a barbarian. Minsk is a ranger like Dritz is a ranger, in name only. Right, I think they might be referring to Ranger the occupation instead of Ranger the actual 5th edition class. Dritz plays more as a fighter, while Minsk plays as a barbarian. Both probably have the Outlander background for any rangery stuff. Where Minsk is from, in Rashomon, when a young warrior decides to become a berserker warrior, he or she joins a berserker lodge. Berserker sounds strangely close to a rage-induced barbarian. Now, each berserker lodge is a warrior society with an animal spirit totem from which its given fighting style is taken. Rashomon berserkers are legendary fighters that can enter a mystical state of battle frenzy through various acts of self-hypnosis and the use of Jahuld. That's a form of Rashimi fire wine. Now, Minsk, being from the Ice Dragon Berserker Lodge, coupled with his affinity for animals, particularly miniature giant space hamsters, gives us a pretty strong indication that Minsk might be a spirit totem barbarian. At least we think so. But that's actually a good segue. Let's talk about these spirit totem barbarian warriors. Their ability profile. Barbarians are an iconic tank class, but they can also be built out as a hit-and-run damage dealer fighter. A barbarian's primary offensive ability, meaning their highest stat, should always be strength. And this is because the bonus damage they get from their rage ability only applies to strength-based melee attacks. It won't work with a ranged or finesse weapon. Now, yes, we do know that you can use strength when using a finesse weapon, but outside of any thematic or story reason, why would you? There are equivalent weapons that require strength from the martial side that are as good, if not better, than any comparable finesse weapon. Now, a barbarian's second highest stat should go into its primary defensive ability. This is usually going to be Constitution, but it's okay to make Constitution your third highest stat. And this is because barbarians get a D12 hit dice for their hit points. This is like getting 2 free points of Constitution modifier when calculating your hit points. Barbarians can feel free to make Dexterity their second highest stat. This shifts their focus going from a tank into much more of a hit-and-run damage dealer.
Now, a Barbarian's unarmored defense feature allows them to add their constitution and their dexterity when making an armor calculation if they're not wearing armor.
But if they wear even one piece of armor, this goes away.
And even though iconically most barbarians fight virtually naked,
as a barbarian, if you can't get your unarmored defense armor class up to 17, you are probably better off wearing half plate if you can afford it.
Or if your dex is high enough, you might be able to beat your unarmored defense armor class if you just wear studded leather instead.
Tactics for a barbarian.
Now, a barbarian is all about risk versus reward.
The challenge is deciding what risk to take and if the reward is truly worth it.
I would like to rage.
Rage, gained at first level for a barbarian, is one of their defining abilities.
Now, rage itself gives you resistance to physical damage and advantage on strength ability checks and saving throws.
And rage provides a damage bonus on strength-based melee weapon attacks.
Now remember, you don't need a melee weapon to make a melee weapon attack. You can do so with your fists.
Now, this extra damage that a barbarian gets while they're enraged is part of what makes them so good as hit-and-run damage dealers.
They can crank out that extra damage.
Now, the major downside to the rage is that it's limited.
And it only recharges on a long rest.
So barbarians should actually be pretty picky when they use their rage, but not that picky.
That's because the average adventuring day is designed around 6 encounters with 2 short rests in between.
But here's the reality. Most adventuring days are either one encounter, then a long rest, or one encounter, then a short rest.
Only when doing a long dungeon crawl are you going to see 6 encounters per day.
So this means if your barbarian knows that they're going to be doing a long, drawn-out dungeon crawl, then they have to be very picky on when they use their rages. But for basically any other time, you should use a rage with every combat encounter.
Rage grants you advantage on strength ability checks and reduces bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage by half.
This effectively doubles your hit points against those types of damage. And it's one of the reasons that a barbarian makes a good tank. They have such a huge hit point stockpile to absorb damage.
A fun trick with this is that a raging barbarian can also grapple an opponent with advantage from their rage and jump off a cliff.
Now, this is going to damage both of you, but when they land, the barbarian is going to be damaged half as much as its grappled opponent.
Can you smell what the rock is cooking?
Now, at level 2, a barbarian gains something called Reckless Attack.
Reckless Attack is the ultimate risk versus reward ability. With it, a barbarian can throw aside all caution for defense and attack with a fierce desperation.
Now, using Reckless Attack, a barbarian gains advantage on all melee attacks it makes that turn.
But the downside is that their opponents gain advantage on all attack rolls against the barbarian until the start of the barbarian's next turn.
Now, Reckless Attack is great if you want to drop an enemy opponent very quickly.
But this also has a secondary, hidden function.
Right, Reckless Attack is your tank ability. Now, let me explain that for a second. Barbarians don't have a taunt ability. They can't force creatures to attack them.
However, a recklessly attacking barbarian grants advantage to enemy attacks. That's very tempting and might entice enemies to attack the barbarian with advantage rather than attacking one of the other party members.
And this is how Barbarian tanks. They make themselves look very tempting to hit.
However, if a barbarian is surrounded by enemies, using Reckless Attack is not a good idea.
And it's an even worse idea if that enemy also has an extra attack or multi-attack of its own.
As a general guideline, barbarians should only use Reckless Attack if they will get to make as many attacks on their turn as all the opponents can make against them on their combined turns.
Right, so a barbarian with, say, extra attack can make 2 attacks, so it should only use Reckless Attack if it has 2 opponents who can each attack it once, or 1 opponent that can attack it twice.
That's a mouthful.
Now, the path of the Totem Warrior.
Those who follow the path of the Totem Warrior become almost unkillable in combat.
Now, all barbarians who rage get resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage. But a Bear Totem Warrior gains resistance to all damage besides psychic.
When you pick this subclass at 3rd level, you'll get to pick a spirit totem animal. This allows you to customize your barbarian how you want to play.
Now at 3rd level, the bear totem makes them extra tanky, giving them resistance to all damage besides psychic.
While raging,
If they choose the eagle spirit totem, they instead grant disadvantage on all opportunity attacks in combat.
this ability is much more suited to a hit-and-run fighter, making it easier for them to dash in and out of combat. And if you pick the wolf, it grants your allies advantage on melee attacks against enemies adjacent to you.
Now the wolf is great if you know that you have a bunch of other player characters in your party who will also be engaged in melee combat. But if it's mostly archers or spellcasters, this is kind of pointless.
At level 14, these spirit totems grant additional benefits.
Now as a note, you don't have to pick the same spirit animal for every ability. You can pick bear and then eagle and then wolf, or mix it up however you want, or you can pick the same spirit animal for every ability.
At level 14, bear further enhances into the tank role by enticing enemies to focus their attention on the barbarian in a manner similar to a paladin's Capel dual spell.
Right, this makes it so that hostile creatures within 5 feet of the barbarian have disadvantage on attack rolls against creatures besides the barbarian.
The eagle totem lets you fly short distances, granting the barbarian additional mobility in combat.
Right, and this ties much more into a hit-and-run damage dealer style of fighting.
The wolf lets you spend a bonus action to knock an enemy prone. No save, just prone.
And this is kind of a combo primer. A prone enemy grants advantage to any melee attack made by a creature within 5 feet. It's an easy way to get advantage against melee opponents if you don't want to use reckless attack. Now, if you want to assume the tank roll, for level 3 and level 14, just pick the bear totem.
If you prefer to be more of a hit-and-run style fighter, pick eagle or wolf totem at 3rd and 14th level.
Now, if you have access to the Sword Coast Adventures Guide, it provides 2 additional spirit animals, an elk and a tiger.
Both of these are quite flavorful, but not really any more efficient in combat than bear, eagle, or wolf.
Now, once you're in combat,
The first thing a barbarian should do when they enter combat is rage.
I would like to rage.
but remember that your rage will end if you finish your turn and you haven't attacked another creature since the end of your last turn, or if you haven't taken any damage since then.
To insulate yourself from this problem, carry a ranged melee weapon, like a javelin or hand axe. You can throw it at the nearest creature and make an attack.
Exactly, you don't have to hit, you just gotta make the attack. Now, if you're playing the tank role, your main job is to occupy the attention of the enemy combatants.
You do this by charging into the bulk of the enemy and engaging in melee combat with them.
For a tank, Constitution is going to be your most important defensive ability.
You're going to need the hit points.
And this is great because barbarians have a huge pool of hit points and it allows them to absorb lots of damage that would otherwise kill a lot of the squishier characters.
But their offensive ability is also important. A barbarian that can't do any meaningful damage to an opponent will not keep their attention in combat.
Exactly, if you're not damaging any opponents, why would they bother paying attention to you?
This means a barbarian needs to have a very high strength so it can dish out the damage, which entices enemies to pay attention to it in combat.
Now, if you're playing the tank role, you need to try to get your armor class as high as possible. Your unarmored defense might be up to this, but if it's not, then you're going to have to get some armor like half plate.
Or scale mail.
A shield also isn't a bad idea.
However, you don't want to make your armor class too high. If you become impossible to hit, then enemies will simply ignore you and take out the rest of your party first.
Exactly, it's a balancing act. Now, if you're doing the tank role, at 3rd and 14th level, you should take the bear totem.
This will make you much more tanky in combat. If you can find a ring of psychic resistance, that will help too.
Now, if you want to be the hit-and-run damage dealer style of barbarian, you're going to be favoring dexterity more than constitution as your primary defensive ability.
You're going to try to avoid damage instead of absorbing it.
Now think of this as more like the Norse berserker rager running around combat during a Viking raid, hitting enemy after enemy and attacking everybody.
For a hit-and-run damage dealer, they should stay approximately half their movement speed away from the front line where the main tank is.
Then on the barbarian's turn, they should use half their movement to run up to the front line and engage in melee combat.
This is enhanced by the Barbarian's fast movement feature, which they get at level 5.
Once in melee combat, they should engage with key opponents trying to do as much damage as possible.
This means rage, reckless attack, multiple attacks, everything they got.
Then, once they've dealt
Maximum damage.
they should use the rest of their movement to leave combat.
Now Barbarian do this will take opportunity attacks when it leaves melee combat.
Exactly, but this isn't necessarily a bad thing. Barbarians can take damage. They're designed for it. And any reaction used to make an opportunity attack against your Barbarian who's using this in and out style of combat means one less opportunity attack against any of the squishier characters.
This allows your squishier characters like mages and rogues more opportunity to move around the battlefield without suffering opportunity attacks.
And much like a hit and run style blade-packed warlock, you want to get hit.
You taking the damage from these opportunity attacks helps your allies.
And if you're raging, you're only going to take half damage from these opportunity attacks anyway.
And remember, opportunity attacks can't be multi-attacks or use the extra attack option. It's a single attack.
Now at 3rd level, if you choose to take the Eagle Spirit Totem, it'll make this a lot easier. This imposes disadvantage on enemies' opportunity attacks against you in combat.
That means you can run up and leave combat, and they will have disadvantage on attacks against you.
Or if you're recklessly attacking, it'll just be a straight attack.
The disadvantage from Eagle Totem is countered by the advantage they get from reckless attack.
Now at level 14, instead of taking the Eagle Totem for increased mobility via flying, you could take the Wolf Totem.
If you have multiple melee combatants in your party, the Wolf Totem will provide extra damage because it grants them advantage on attacks.
But if you don't have very many melee combatants in your party, then this is kind of pointless, so don't bother taking it.
Honestly, at level 14, any totem besides Bear is ideal for a hit-and-run damage dealer. They all provide some level of increased mobility or damage.
Now, something key to remember for your combat tactics is that tanks are supposed to be stationary.
Other party members like the healers, damage dealers, and skirmishers all base their positioning off of where the tank is standing.
Exactly. Most of the other party members will key off of where the front line is, and that's usually where the tank is standing.
So move around as little as possible while still doing your job.
Right. If you move around too much, then your damage dealers, your healers, and your archers all have to compensate for that with their own movement. It's much easier if you stay in one spot and they can pick their positioning.
Now you're probably wondering what feats to take, so let's cover that.
Right. Feats like subclasses have a way of changing your role in combat. They can account for deficiencies or give you an advantage to be able to fight a certain way.
Tanks can enhance their melee attacks with Great Weapon Master, Savage Attacker, Shield Master.
Or if a tank wishes to specialize in Magicide, they can take the Mage Slayer feat. But remember, if you're a Spirit Totem tank, you're going to be responsible for dealing with anybody who has magical damage or elemental damage, because you're the one who's resistant to it. Or for a tank to make itself even stickier, it can take the Sentinel feat.
If you're doing the hit-and-run damage dealer role, you can get the jump on enemies by using the Alert feat.
Or if you want to move in and out of combat a lot easier, you can take the Mobile feat. But if you're going to take the Mobile feat, you're more than likely not going to need the Eagle Totem at 3rd level. You won't need to give enemies disadvantage on their opportunity attacks because you won't be triggering them. So in that case, just pick a different totem.
Exactly. Take Mobile or the Eagle Totem, not both.
Now, Barbarian Hit and Run Damage Dealer can also increase its combat attacks by taking the Great Weapon Master or Polearm Master feats. Polearm Master is particularly interesting because it gives them an extra attack to use with their bonus action, and it grants them reach so they don't have to get into melee combat to engage with enemies before retreating.
Orcish Fury is also an excellent feat to use if you want to maximize your damage per second, but you need to be an orc.
And that's it. These are the basics on how to run a Spirit Totem Barbarian in combat, either as a tank or a damage dealer. They're not really as effective in the other combat roles, but you're going to have lots of fun using them for these two.
Spirit Totem Barbarians are incredibly customizable and give a fun nature feel to them.
Right, and if I was building Minsk as a player character for 5th edition, it would be as a Spirit Totem Barbarian.
Have fun playing.
And remember, thanks for showing up. We love you guys. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.